Gyrish Nation, we are back. Episode 4, Season 4. We are surviving our marathon recording session here. This is the last one we're going to record today, so we are flying through them on August the 18th. I'll keep saying that, so in case if new news breaks in any of our, recruiting updates that we're covering on this show, someone decommits or someone else commits. If we miss someone here, we're recording on the 18th and might not get these posted here until a week or so later. So be on the lookout for these. Mike, we're surviving it. We're still on camera. We have not edited any of these, so we have no idea how it actually looks when we get through makeup and post-production work. But we're hanging in there and we're learning the new technology as we go. How you doing, man?
I'm good. I mean, I think the video feed that I'm seeing of myself when we're recording, I feel generally okay about it, but I'm nervous that when I see the reality of it, that there's going to be some inversion and it'll just, it'll show my face in the most unflattering way possible. So,
Mike, every day I look in the mirror and I just see this awesome looking guy staring back at me. And then I go into the world and everyone else is like, who the hell is this schmuck? So, I mean, you're going through what I'm going through every day. We're just getting a real test now, putting our mugshots out there on YouTube.
Let's just, I think we just put on Sam Hartman masks next time we record. We'll just do that. And I think I'm sure our
viewership will spike.
And then Sam, we'll get like a court order from Sam Hartman. It'll be like, hey, you didn't pay me. You're profiting from my likeness.
We didn't do that NIL. Yeah, we skipped the I. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. But yeah, dude, I think this is, I think things so far, it seems like it's been going well. We've mentioned this in our other intros to our other episodes for this season preview, but we've upgraded our technology. We're doing video now. I have a new laptop. I have everything on one system as opposed to 4 different devices and combining them all to cobble together a podcast.
The 21st century has arrived for Gyrish Talk.
Yes, and we're excited about it. It seems like it's going well. Now, this next episode, we're going to focus. We already did transfer portal and the implications for Notre Dame this year. We did the offense, we did the defense, and now this episode we're going to be covering recruiting, which in addition to transfers, recruiting still remains a lifeblood of the health of a college football program. It's very critical. Even though you can fill plugs through the transfer portal, it's hard to totally replace just extremely effective recruiting. So that'll be the theme for this episode. I think one other call out I want to do, just because this is an early episode this year, one of our first few episodes, is that just remind everyone that we're data focused. We really lean into advanced statistics, analytics. We're glass half full. We're not looking to criticize, make personal remarks about players or coaches. We're not looking to get in fights with opposing fan bases. Now, look, if someone's coming at us on Twitter, we'll come back. We'll bite back a little bit. We'll be reasonable, but we're not going to make personal insults or anything like that. We try to have a very measured approach here. Brett and I love this university. We love this school, and we think that one of the aspects that we love about it so much is that our fellow alums, current students, we tend to be, I would say, everyone tends to be pretty respectful. You tend to, like, one thing you often hear from opposing fan bases is how nice the Notre Dame fans are when they visit. Now, I would say at times we could maybe be a little bit more aggressive and not be as welcoming. We want to have an intimidating road atmosphere. But I think it does speak to the type of community that we're in and how much we appreciate it. So that's really what we're trying to do here. And that's something that we've been very consistent about since we started this podcast a couple of years ago.
Absolutely. Trying to have a positive forum, analytical takes. It kind of makes sense for 2 Notre Dame guys that we want to elevate the discussion, keep things positive, but also hopefully be really informative for our viewers. And hopefully learn a couple new ways to think about the game, a couple new ways to track the team, a couple new stats to follow that might explain, hey, what's going on, or hey, what should we expect? Recruiting, a very natural place for that. So we try to cover recruiting a few times a year, usually right before the season. Always a good bye-week conversation when a lot of commitments can come in. And then, of course, tons of off-season fodder in the winter and spring. So we're going to look ahead. We know the freshmen that are coming in. We're going to look ahead to the rising high school seniors who will be the class of 2025 coming on campus for the 2025 campaign. Will not be impacting football this year, but we think it's a good time to level set on where we're at. We're currently ranked number 8 overall in that recruiting cycle from the 24/7 composite rankings. We have 21 commits. And probably the biggest headline is it's not going to get better from here. We've got a few remaining targets. One is actually JOK, Jeremiah Wosu Koromora. Did I get that right? I don't know. Half Malort shot in our Malort counter. His brother Nathaniel is still on the board. But we're largely expecting to round out the class with lower end commits. And I think it's always important to mention we kind of make the blue wave political analogy in voting that the Democratic Party has more absentee mail-in ballots that are counted after the in-person vote. So if you just look at in-person voting, it looks more red and it shifts blue as the mail-in ballots get counted. That kind of happens to Notre Dame recruiting, but in a bad way, where we get a lot of our targets, a lot of our 4-stars early in the cycle, the academically minded Notre Dame, kind of character type. But a lot of the 5-stars still come late. A lot of Georgia and Ohio State and Alabama's and Texas A&M's and Texas of the world, they're still out there going after some of the big targets left on the board that are uncommitted. And so you'll see a wave where we might start out last year's cycle, for example. We were number 1 for a really long time and faded to number 10. But I think faded would be the wrong word to use. We just cemented our class earlier and the others cemented their class later. You could see something happen again. So if you look at the point ratings that 24/7 applies on that number 8 ranking, it translates to a top 10, 15 recruiting class. Maybe it stays around a top 10 class if we notched up with 1 or 2 commits or 3, 4 more commits, even on the lower end. So I think Notre Dame fans should be saying, okay, we're number 8 right now, but this is kind of a number 15 class. This is kind of mid double digits. This isn't a top 10 recruiting class right now. And I think there's probably more downside to upside because of the potential for decommits. And so maybe that's a good question, Mike, for you. I think it's the big headline that's been around recruiting right now. Walk us through the headliner in this recruiting cycle.
Yeah, I mean, so the gem of the class is the quarterback, Deuce Knight. So he's from Mississippi. Doesn't fit the typical profile that you would see from most Notre Dame commits. So he's from the Deep South and he goes to a public school. So if you look at the profile of Notre Dame recruits, I would say you tend to lean more not in the Deep South. Not to say that we never get those guys, but I would say that is not an area that we've excelled in. And we tend to do really well with private schools, particularly Catholic schools. So I think this is Freeman trying to expand the type of player that Notre Dame gets. And when you do that, it's going to be tougher to get them to buy in, and there's going to be more decommit risk. And so I think you kind of take all that I said right here, apply that to Deuce Knight, and it's not surprising to have reports come out. I think it was like in the past week or two that he's potentially wavering. A couple of prominent recruiting analysts have actually, in fact, projected him to flip to Auburn, and it hasn't happened yet. I think if you're looking for some room for optimism, it's that at least the impression that I got was that some of these analysts were expecting it to happen sooner rather than later. It hasn't happened yet. So maybe he's holding on, and then the longer this goes without him flipping, maybe that looks better for Notre Dame. Maybe we can get him back on campus for a visit and kind of, make him feel better about his commitment. So I think that's kind of like maybe some, a bit of hope that we could have. But I think what does not make you feel better is that Deuce Knight, over the course of his recruitment, his profile has exploded, honestly, over the last 6 months. So he was always a solid 4-star recruit, but over the last 6 months as he's gone to these elite summer camps and he's played against top competition, his profile has been elevated. He's been scouted more extensively by these recruiting services, by college coaches, even some NFL coaches. And the more they get a look under the hood, the more they like. So now he's actually ranked number 29 per the 24/7 composite. And that actually makes him a 5-star. So as of right now, he is actually a 5-star recruit, a 5-star quarterback. And this is coming after we had CJ Carr last year. So we've definitely never lapped 2 great quarterbacks like this before. So I think again, you have a little hope that maybe he sticks because he hasn't flipped yet. But as he gets better and better, or at least his recruiting projection does, it stings a little bit more that he might flip. It makes the kind of like the promise of this class, definitely dampers a little bit.
Yeah, and I think this is less about Auburn as it is about just it means Deuce Knight's back on the market. So Auburn, I mean, their projected win total 7.5. I'm sure they came out with some massive NIL package, but like at the end of the day, Auburn might go 6-6 this year. Auburn might go 4-8 this year. They ain't going 9-3. They aren't in playoff conversation. So what this really means is, okay, Deuce Knight is willing to listen to NIL offers. Deuce Knight is willing to be on the market. And so whether it's Auburn or any other number of, well-endowed universities with other NIL packages, it's clear that the recruiting of Deuce Knight is far from over. And another example of that, he was all over social media trying to get other recruits to join this recruiting class, to follow his lead as quarterback of the recruiting class. And that's gotten real quiet lately. Like the social media videos he's been sending out, the retweeting he's been doing. Maybe it's still happening on text messaging. Maybe it's still happening behind the scenes. But it's also not lost. I think the other highlight of this class is we swung and missed at wide receiver, which we've been talking about as like the biggest question mark on the roster. And in Mike Brown's first attempt at recruiting, we were in play for 2 or 3 4-star recruits. We were for a while leading on the recruitment of 5-star Derek Meadows, who signs with LSU. Turns out if you give a guy a lot of facilities and you give a guy a huge NIL budget, turns out Brian Kelly can recruit 5 stars. Wink, wink. Notre Dame was the recruiting problem, not Brian Kelly. And so 5-star Derek Meadows signs with LSU. I think that was a bad look for Deuce Knight. Like Deuce Knight was very publicly recruiting for Derek Meadows to join Notre Dame. It then doesn't work out. Does that impact how Deuce Knight views Notre Dame? Does that kind of make sense, right? Like if you're trying to get your buddy hired at your employer and then your buddy goes elsewhere, that might make you rethink your job. And so I think Deuce Knight's back in play. And I think we're going to have to keep using the transfer portal for wide receiver. And I think those two things are actually hand in hand until we start getting the high-end QB like CJ Carr or Deuce Knight to click on campus and therefore help produce NFL-ready wide receivers. The Derek Meadows of the world going to LSU, I mean, look at what they've churned out in Justin Jefferson and Odell Beckham and Jarvis Landry. I mean, you can just go down the list of like guys that LSU has playing wide receiver in the NFL. And this year, Notre Dame's best NFL wide receiver is probably Ben Skoranek. Like, that is not great marketing material if you're trying to recruit wide receivers. Like Miles Boykin, Chase Claypool, Will Fuller, like they're not really like meaningful in the league anymore. And that's hard to point to. Like you have to point to the high school kid and say, hey, you are going to be what makes Notre Dame make it at the NFL and wide receiver, not, hey, we have 10 NFL guys. Here, you're going to be number 11. Like, here's the blueprint. And I think all that's related with Deuce Knight. So hearing those two, overall, solid class. Deuce Knight's the headliner. Big miss at wide receiver. Any other big headlines you would point out about the strengths of this class?
Well, I think what we're continuing to see is that the secondary is being recruited well, particularly the corner. So we mentioned this in a prior episode. Mickens has done a phenomenal job with the corners, done a phenomenal job with the secondary, and we're continuing to see him, expand on that excellence. So we have 2 top 150 corners in the secondary. I think you're getting the benefit of having someone like Ben Morrison. You're having the benefit of having someone like Julian Love do really well in the league, although actually he's more of a safety in the NFL. And so I think when prospects are looking at that, they're seeing that Notre Dame is a place. If you're a top corner, it is a place that you can go to. You can play in an exceptional position group, and you can be developed into a top NFL prospect. So if we're looking at where the cornerback room was and where it's gotten to, that's basically what we need what's essentially what we need to happen with the wide receiver room. We're kind of like starting from a point where it's been like a rough run. And, I think the transfer portal helps a lot. It's like one way that we can maybe kickstart some of this is you have some transfers come in and they perform really well. And, you have some receivers from that standpoint coming to do well. And then I think I think one anecdote to just kind of improve everything is just to have the offense perform well. So if this year, if our offense is really clicking and our offense is explosive, then I think it becomes a much easier conversation to have with some of these top wide receivers. We can actually show them tape and say, hey, look at how we scheme to get people open. Look how many yards Chris Mitchell got. Like, look at how that translated to how NFL scouts were looking at him. But we don't have that yet. And because we don't have that right now, that's why we're continuing to see it to be challenging to recruit some of these top wide receivers. Now, we should be able to do better than what we're doing right now. I think, like you said, we just have a couple 3-star wide receivers, and maybe they'll end up being great players. But I would think Notre Dame, we should be able to do better than that. We should at least be able to get some 4-star wide receivers. And it's not over yet. If we have a really good season, things can open up with prospects who you thought you might not have, who may have not been an option before. If we go undefeated and our offense is explosive, maybe someone who wasn't listening to us, 6 months in the past is now willing to take the call. So, I think that's, if you're looking for some reasons for optimism, I think that's what you have to lean on.
If I step back and evaluate this class as a whole, we try to have positive takes here. And I'm kind of down on Marcus Freeman as a recruiter right now. And I think I'm the minority in that for sure. I don't think that's where a lot of other, media talking heads following Notre Dame football are at. But if I step back and think, I kind of throw out the early years of Brian Kelly as a recruiter at Notre Dame because he was cleaning up a mess post Charlie Weiss. But his last 3 cycles were number 9, number 10, and number 15. Freeman's first 2 cycles are number 10 and number 13. And he's tracking towards around a number 15. Like, he hasn't upgraded from Brian Kelly. And Pete Sampson had a mailbag article of like, how do you evaluate Freeman as a recruiter? And he started pointing towards recruiting is just as good with undergrad high school students as it was with Kelly. And it's way better with NIL and transfers. Well, no, duh. I love Pete Sampson. I'm the biggest Pete Sampson fan in the world, but I thought this was a poorly written point. Like, NIL and the transfer portal didn't exist for Brian Kelly. And in fact, Notre Dame's resistance to NIL and transfers was a big reason why Brian Kelly left, but also that just wasn't as big of a thing for college football 3 years ago. And clearly Brian Kelly's able to do that at LSU. Like, he got a Heisman Trophy winner through the NIL, through an NIL deal in the transfer portal and Jaden Daniels. Like, clearly Brian Kelly can do those things. Notre Dame is just behind the curve. And frankly, I think Brian Kelly leaving maybe woke up Notre Dame to be able to let Freeman do those things. So of course Freeman's better at NIL deals than Brian Kelly, because NIL deals didn't exist 5 years ago. Of course we're better in the portal today because the portal was maybe a couple of guys 5 years ago. Now it's 20. And I'll just give you 2 comparisons. I'm going to give you the stat lines of 2 Notre Dame quarterbacks. 1-year starter, 66% completion, 3,150 yards, 25 touchdowns, 7 interceptions, and led a team to an 11-2 record and a top finish in the AP polls. 1-year starter, 64% completion, 2,700 passing yards, 24 touchdowns, 8 interceptions, 10-3 record, top 15 finish in the AP poll. Do you know the 2 quarterbacks I'm talking about? I have a test here from Mike.
Is that a question for me? Or okay,
it's
not a rhetorical. Okay,
yeah.
It's a question for me. All right, so 10-3 record. That's going to be Hartman, right?
Yep. So Sam Hartman is the second quarterback I rattled.
Second quarterback. First one. Let's see. Is that going to be? I mean, because it's not like we've had a ton of transfer QBs, right? So that's got to be. Was it Jack Cohn? Did we go 11-2 that year?
It's Jack Cohn. So Brian Kelly proved he could win with a transfer quarterback. Like, he used the transfer portal to, put together a top 10 season when we didn't otherwise have a quarterback option. So I think this narrative that Freeman is crushing it in recruiting and pointing to the transfer portal, I don't know. I think those are 2 separate things. I think he's doing a great job in the transfer portal. I think he's doing a great job using NIL to retain the super seniors like Howard Cross and Xavier Watts and Riley Mills. But we were also expecting to get some 5-stars. We were also expecting to elevate the high school recruiting scene, and we're just kind of the same. And I'm not caught up in any one decommit. Like, that's part of the process. I'm not caught up in any one miss like Derek Meadows. That's part of the process. But how do we go through this cycle where our number 1 position of weakness is wide receiver, And the only two we have are Plexico Burris' son and Jerome Bettis' son, two like nepotism commits that are both very low end 3-star recruits. How's that happen? And if it does, we need to be honest with ourselves that it was a failure, or as I like to say, your failures are learning moments. This needs to be a learning moment for Marcus Freeman. But I think for Notre Dame fans and administrators, there's not an upgrade in recruiting right now. And that's not to say Freeman's a bad recruiter. I think it's to say he's doing exactly what Brian Kelly did. He might be more the face of it rather than putting his assistant coaches in, but the output from recruiting is effectively unchanged from where we were under Brian Kelly. And the trade-off was to lose the experienced, savvy, in-game adjustment coach in Brian Kelly in exchange for the young recruiter. Now, Marcus Freeman is actually, I think, outperformed with the in-game coach. I think he's picked up on those aspects of the job. I think he's picked up on swung and missed on offensive coordinator in year one. But Al Golden and Mike Denbrock, forget Jared Parker for a second, shooting 2 for 3 on coordinators, and where you're left with is a coaching staff featuring those two guys at coordinator, like way better CEO coach than I was expecting. But I don't think that means we can let him off the hook on the recruiting side that this isn't quite what we were expecting. This is below expectation.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think it just drives home a point that's pretty tough to stomach as a Notre Dame fan. And that's that if you're if you're a bona fide 5-star recruit, say you're a top 10 defensive end in the entire country, your expectations are you want to get to the NFL as quickly as possible, right? And so that means what? You spend 3 years in college and then you get drafted ideally in the first round. For a lot of players in that position, it's a tough ask to say, hey, instead of focusing all your time on football, we want you to put a lot of time into football, of course, but we also want you to show up to class and take very challenging academic courses. Brett and I were students at Notre Dame. There aren't really any places to hide if you're even if you're the top football player in the program. They're still taking.
Tom Rees hit very well an intro to jazz in a class I took with Tom Rees. But I hear you. They got to show up to class. They have a heavy credit load. They're not taking online classes. They're not taking a bunch of courses in the summer to pad it. Like, easier academic load, yes, but they're full-time students.
Yeah, you can take an easier major for sure. Like you don't have to take biochemistry, right? You can take film classes. You can. There are a lot of options of things that you could take, but you still have to put the work in, and you're not going to be able to fill your entire curriculum with easy classes. Like you're going to have to take some tough classes here and there. And I think, if you're a 5-star recruit, I think that their approach is, you know what, I'm all business. My career is an NFL player. Of course, it would be great to develop academically, but why am I going to spend all my time on this when I can just dedicate all that attention into developing into a top prospect? So I think that's one key element. I think another one is, and we kind of hinted at this with Deuce Knight, is if you look at who 5-star prospects tend to be, they tend to come from the South, a lot of them from the deep South, and a lot of them come from public schools. And as I mentioned, those are areas that don't really fit like the typical Notre Dame profile. So even just from a cultural standpoint, it's a tougher thing to convince them to do. Deuce Knight, you mentioned it, he was all about Notre Dame. It seemed like he has, by all accounts, he still has the best relationships with the Notre Dame staff than anyone else. It seems like he loves the school. But I think as you're getting close to the day where you actually have to leave home and go somewhere else, it makes sense that he might get a little nervous about it. It's like, okay, I'm going to a place where I'm going to be around types of people that I've never been around before in my entire life. Or I could just, I can stay at a school that's, still going to be a great place for football. And I'm going to be around people that I'm familiar with, people that I'm comfortable with. So I think it's not unusual that he could be having some of these feelings. Now, look, maybe he'll be willing to kind of take that leap to Notre Dame, but still it's a hurdle that we have to get past that a lot of other schools don't. And I think that's what Freeman's kind of bumping into here. And maybe that's what we're seeing a bit with the receivers. I think we're trying to, as Brian Kelly would say, I think it was Brian, shop down a different aisle. Like whenever we try to shop down a different aisle, we got burned a bunch of times over and over again. It happened. This has happened to Freeman. It happened. At one point, I think, I forgot which recruiting. It was either a year or two ago. We had like a couple 5-star recruits that it looked like we were going to get. It was like Dante. Maybe it was last year. It was like Dante Moore, There was that safety who ended up going to Oklahoma, and then blanking on the guy who went to Alabama. But there's like three of them, and we totally looked like at one point it looked like we were going to get them, and we whiffed on all of them. So it's just it's like if you kind of I get the attempt to do it because if you want to close that gap, I mean, the best way is to actually land players like that. But Freeman could be learning some lessons that Brian Kelly learned, and that's like how do you actually want to allocate your attention and resources with recruiting? Do you take these big swings, or is it actually a waste of time because like the hit rate on this is really really low? Maybe you're better served just going after these like just a bunch of really good 4-stars. And I think it's an interesting question as opposed to just getting these, getting a bunch of 5-stars. If you just do a really good job getting a ton of high 4-stars and do a really good job developing them, will that be enough to actually get to that top level and win a title? I don't know. It's an interesting question. I guess Clemson maybe in the past would have been an example of doing that. You need a really
Really
good
hard.
Yeah, we're getting into a tangent here, but you really need a top quarterback to be able to pull that off. So I think it's possible to do it, but it's certainly a lot harder than just the Georgia model, which is, we just have all the best high school football players in the country on our team. That's
Absolutely.
the probability for that's a lot higher.
I think, and I want to be really clear on my take too. This is less a Marcus Freeman evaluation, and it's more a Notre Dame realization. Like when Kelly left, I was on this podcast saying we are overselling his recruiting shortcomings that are Notre Dame shortcomings and will still be here regardless of the coach, and are underselling how good of a football coach Brian Kelly was. With Freeman, he is proving to be a very good college football coach. Last year was a testament to that. He's got to go do it again. You have to do that year in and year out. You can't just have one good year. And losing to, Marshall and Stanford 2 years ago, unacceptable. You need to prove that page has been turned and is in the rearview mirror. And as a recruiter, I just think it's like, I think we have to acknowledge the ceiling might be a top 10 recruiting class at Notre Dame and not a top 5 recruiting class. And that's the reality of the administration. If we want to change that, we need to, as a university, as a benefactor base, as our board of trustees, as an administration with a new president and a new AD to say, you know what? We do think we can loosen up the undergrad admission standards for the football team. You know what? On transfers, you can come in as an undergrad transfer from a school not named Northwestern, Stanford, or the Naval Academy. Like, we will take someone other than just the grad transfers. That, again, is still a major limit in the transfer portal for us. Like, we're going to open up where 70% of the top 100 recruits don't academically qualify for Notre Dame. So of the top 100 recruits, we can only look at 30%, and Alabama is offering all 100 of them. We can only offer 30. Like, we're recruiting with one hand tied behind our back, and there's a realization that Freeman's not been able to overcome that. I don't think that's a Marcus Freeman problem. I think that's a Notre Dame problem. But the reality of the cards is the expectations that Freeman was going to elevate us to having top 3-5 classes, it's not coming to fruition. Like, sorry, Irish Nation, that ain't there. We need to be thinking about how do we have a top 10 roster that contends for a national title. And right now feels like the perfect storm of that happening. I get really concerned. How sustainable is that? Like, I think we are a contender for a national title this year. I think I maybe say that once every 5 years. And when I look ahead to next year, having substantially no wide receiver recruits and knowing at some point we're going to lose the current wide receivers, and the only guy that I feel good about behind them is true freshman Cam Williams. But like, if Jaden Thomas pops and goes to the NFL draft, Bo Collins is retiring, Chris Mitchell's, or I say retiring, graduating. Like, I don't know. There's just like, it's not like next year we're going to go from 6 wide receivers to 10, because guess what? We swung and missed recruiting. And that's just a reality of being a Notre Dame fan, where enjoy what we have right now, because I think we're a contender, but we haven't elevated our recruiting to really feel like a top 5 team year in and year out. And that stinks. I think Freeman's doing everything he can to optimize that, using NIL and retaining guys for 5th year, using the transfer portal really, really well. But the recruiting hasn't shifted in a big way. And that's a tough realization for Notre Dame fans to stomach. But it's one that I think we just all got to keep, wherever you can. If you know someone in the Notre Dame athletic department, if you know someone in the Notre Dame admissions department, Like, I think we as a fan base need to demand more. And it's not of Marcus Freeman, it's of the administration to say, come on, guys. Like, do we really need all 85 scholarships on the football team to like be up to snuff with whatever we think is our top 20 academic rating? Like, come on. Can we not bifurcate the two? Like, come on. Can we really not take an undergrad transfer who's not on pace to retire in 4 years or to graduate in 4 years, but might be on pace to graduate in 5 years? But if they didn't take, chemistry as a freshman and advanced calculus as a freshman at whatever school they were at, oh, sorry, you can't be an undergrad transfer. You'll have to wait to be a grad transfer. Like, stop it. Just stop it. That's silly. Like, for the love of Notre Dame, please go and do what it takes to win a title. And we just keep asking our head coaches to recruit with one hand behind our back. So my biggest point in all of that is this isn't a Marcus Freeman point as much as it is this like dream that Marcus Freeman was going to elevate above all of the restrictions of Notre Dame and deliver top 3 recruiting classes. They look and feel just like Brian Kelly's. And that's a reality of recruiting. But I think we're still in a really great spot for 2024, certainly.
Definitely. And I think if you're looking for ways that Notre Dame can overcome, I guess, these recruiting challenges that we have, I think Notre Dame is uniquely situated in this NIL transfer portal environment. I think if you're looking at players from other programs who are all business, they're looking to kind of just go in, kind of carve out a strong role for themselves at a football program. Whereas like earlier in their career, maybe it didn't work out. I think Notre Dame actually could be
Great
one
landing spot.
Yeah, and we've done, that's the thing, we've done really well in the transfer portal. Again, I think like Ohio State, yeah, maybe they've done it a little bit better than us, but I think we're near the top. We can offer a lot in terms of NIL, which is now totally legal, by the way. Actually, legal is not the right word. It's within the confines of the rules. I don't know if it was ever technically.
It's
illegal.
much more transparent and
It's
above
transparent,
board.
yeah. But look, that's an area. Notre Dame has huge following, huge fan base, extremely well funded. Like, we can be extremely competitive in NIL, and we're already seeing that happen. Maybe we started out a little bit slow, but I think where we're at now is actually a pretty good place to be. And then, as I mentioned, as a transfer portal destination, we've proven ourselves as a location that can develop players. We've proven ourselves as a location that can help develop players into top NFL picks. So I think that is an element that can actually, and then also the academic component. If you're someone who's a really solid college football player and a fringe NFL player, maybe, I don't know, maybe you're looking a little bit more closely at the academics and life after football. So I think that's something that can help us attract some of these, very strong college players who may not necessarily be an NFL player. So those are elements that I think could help mitigate, kind of these recruiting challenges. And we're already seeing that. And look, it's not like the recruiting is a disaster or anything. Like, we're generally getting top 10 classes. We'll see how this year shakes out. Maybe it's top 15. If we have a really good year, I wouldn't be surprised if we're able to make some moves kind of near the end to kind of, increase it a little bit. But yeah, I mean, I think Freeman, I'm with you, Brett. I think Freeman's just kind of running into the same types of issues that Brian Kelly ran into. And yeah, I mean, we're not saying sell the farm in terms of like administrative policies, but there are things that you can do to kind of loosen it and make it a little bit easier. We're not saying create fake classes like UNC, but we're saying that there are reasonable things that
Shots
you can
fired.
do. Yeah, well, they're the ones who created the classes, so I think they deserve all the blame on that one.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I think it's and the university, I think, has become a bit more reasonable on some of these things over the years.
Sure.
So yeah,
For
it just
sure.
takes time. So maybe we get there and it becomes more like what it was like under Lou Holtz. But we'll see. I'm optimistic that we'll continue to kind of keep moving in that direction.
Absolutely. So with that, 4 shows down, we're going to cover the season schedule on our next episode, and then we'll be ready to talk some actual football. We'll dive into the Texas A&M game in more detail, but we'll round out one more holistic take at the Notre Dame 2024 campaign and the opponents we've got on the slate. So with that, Gyrish.